दोस्तों सबको सलाम और आदाब। मेरा नाम अली चिश्ती है। और मैं आपको काफ़ी लोग जो है वो स्टार्ट तो व्हाट इज हैपनिंग इन इंडिया एंड पाकिस्तान एट द मोमेंट। सो if you know, if you've been following this region and um, for a long time, Pakistan and India are again fighting for what is now Kashmir. With the interesting take about this is Trump, who is probably one of the most powerful man or represents one of the most powerful states, said India and Pakistan have been fighting this for last 15 years. So the Americans had somehow said that both Pakistanis and Indians need to sort this bilaterally, which actually shows, and we talk about this. I would want to talk about what is happening in this region A, and of course, what is happening in right now. Obviously, I'll talk about the diplomatic aspects from the Pakistani perspective. We'll talk about naval Pakistan Navy, which is probably underestimated, or what I say is a dark horse. And we talk about the Indian strategies with regards to the naval blockade. And we talk about Turkish drones and how the PF had been inducting the drones in this strategy, and of course the Pakistani strategy, and then we conclude. So first, let's talk about what is happening and or what has happened or transpired. Just do a quick recap as to what has happened. So as you know, that a new militant organization or resistance front, which Indians say that is an extension of Lashkar-e-Taiba, has killed 26 Indian tourists at a place which is around 300 kilometers inside deep to a place which actually borders Jammu and Kashmir, which separates Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian side says, of course, these are Pakistani backed militants. The Pakistani, of course, denies it. And this has brought in the new aspect where the Indian media have started, or pressuring that pressure moves from Indian media has started, whereas to they want the Indian government to take some sort of action which they've taken in Pulwama or Uri. The Pakistanis, on the other hand, and then of course India came up with, for the first time of what they say that they want to suspend the Indus Water Treaty. They've created, they called literally all Pakistanis persona non grata and asked them to leave within 48 hours. And India has called all its military observers who were stationed in Islamabad. On the next day, of course, suspended Shimla agreement and came up with reciprocal steps. But when we talk about Shimla agreement, the status right now is that the Pakistanis think that there is no line of control as of yet. So Pakistanis had gone beyond what was agreed on Shimla agreement and have basically revoked Shimla agreement. From the Pakistani state perspective, there is no Azad Kashmir and there is no Jammu and Kashmir. There is one Kashmir which is which is owned by Pakistan. So effectively, when I talk about Kashmir, there, as from a Pakistani perspective, there is no LOC as such. There's a lot of warmongering going on, of course, on both sides, and both sides have agreed on what we call, broader scrimmage, and what we've seen in Azad Kashmir or Jammu Kashmir since yesterday. There have been a lot of fighting. There were, at the same time, both armies are preparing for war. We've seen footages and Pakistanis actually going on to see tanks being transported to the border areas and different sites. We all know what has happened, of course. My aspect right now, and I wanted to discuss three main end topics here. One is the diplomatic side, of course. Number two is, of course, the navy side, and of course the Turkish drones and the Pakistani strategy overall. And I've got some notes written on the subject, so I would be speaking, without reading them. And this is obviously my analysis of what has happened by speaking to a lot of stakeholders and things which we do. So diplomatically, what has happened is that while the Indians have called on the Americans, and the American vice president was there. Trump came up with this huge statement that this is a issue which is 1500 years ago. So that somehow was an Indian defeat, because what has happened previously, or the Indian expectation was that the Americans would be tough on Pakistan on that issue. So that didn't play well for India. In the United Nations Security Council, it was the Chinese and the Pakistanis who came up with a draft. The Americans initially wrote a draft which the Pakistanis didn't like, and Pakistanis being part of the United Nations Security Council, um, through Chinese lobby to get another draft and sorted that out. So that was another diplomatic defeat. In all these countries, which from Middle East to Europe and from China to all these countries which are even pro India like France and everything, they condemned what has happened in Kashmir. So did the Pakistan. But of course, none of them came even short of naming Pakistan. So there's another diplomatic victory for Pakistan. Even Israel, according to reports, this one Israeli tourist was killed. Israeli foreign minister condemned what has happened in Kashmir. Again, the Israelis came short of even naming Pakistan. So that was the Israeli reaction to what has happened. If you look at the Chinese, an Indus Water Treaty, Pakistan had spoken. At the same time, the Pakistani deputy prime minister who looks after the foreign ministry, Sardar, with Tariq Fatmi, who's a man in charge of foreign ministry, understands countries and relations, is an expert. They came up with a strategy of briefing all these friendly countries and not so friendly countries as to what has happened. And they absolutely made it clear to the two countries which mattered that water would be as decided by by Pakistan National Security Council and the nuclear command, that what stopping Pakistan's water would be an act of war. And obviously in Pakistan's nuclear doctrine, water remains as a threshold where Pakistan has in a stated nuclear doctrine has stated that the Pakistan would use a nuclear or a tactical nuclear device if water somehow is compromised. Even the flow of water, they've decided, would be a red line in terms of Pakistani doctrine. So that was the diplomacy front, and I think, and then the Chinese, which obviously condemned it. But let's talk about how the Chinese are looking at this. So, Chinese being Chinese never directly comes into these sort of conflicts. Of course, the initial reaction came through the Chinese state-backed newspapers, and we saw two op-eds from their think tanks where they said if India stops Pakistan's water, that would be a national security threat for China as well, and China has an equal right to stop the Chinese water flowing through Tibet to India, and there is no treaty as such between India and China. So reciprocal. So when India talks about two front war, I think India should be prepared for a three and a half front war. So the Chinese came up with this, which was a clear policy. Only today, the Chinese foreign minister came up with a statement that condemned what has happened in Kashmir. Absolutely, it's condemned. But of course, he came up with a statement that there has to be unbiased inquiry as to what has happened in Kashmir. So the Chinese doesn't believe India. In fact, what we see now from all these diplomatic circles, even from the friendliest of countries to India, they have not taken India's line as to blaming Pakistan, but have actually they knew the Indian design as to what has happened. This might be a I'm not saying it's a false flag operation, but they've come short of naming Pakistan or any other organization who is involved. But everybody wants in what we call an impartial inquiry as to what has happened. What does an impartial inquiry mean? It should not involve the state of India. So when somebody says that, of course, that actually undermines India's credibility among us, and there are serious mistrust issues between India and China, with a lot of people. But apparently, so this has happened. So we talked about diplomacy. Right, now we talk about Navy. I personally think that Pakistan Navy is this dark horse which no one even in Pakistan talks about. But if you look at Pakistan Navy in the last 20-25 years, historically, Pakistan Navy had this posture of being an attacking force. And I'll tell you, attacking force was not conceived as a defensive aggressive force, but is always conceived to be an attack force. So that is why we traditionally didn't procure more destroyers and everything, but we emphasize on what we call the submarine attack force. So even in 71, we had a submarine when India didn't have one. India had a aircraft carrier. at that time. So and obviously, submarine being submarine is an attacking um, uh, weapon, or which is used in navy. Of course, so we had conceived Pakistan. For it's only in about 20-25 years Pakistan went into what we call the major modernization phase of navy, where even if you see in 96 we bought Augusta submarines, but it was in 2000, after General Musharraf's time, and he was one of one of the founders. I think, being an army man, he understood navy, helped the navy or naval chiefs to somehow come up with in the modernizing of navy program. So destroyers were inducted. If you see Pakistan navy, there have been a lot of inductions from China and Turkey at the moment, and this how do we put it, this in layman's word, this modernization of navy began in about 20 years, and now we've been receiving some of the orders which are there, but there's a lot of submarines which are still which will receive in 2028, in 29. So our navy has been in sort of a modernization phase, but at the same time, is it a modern navy? Of course. I think there have been a lot of upgrades as to what is going to the existing structure. But so Pakistan came up with the theory of safeguarding its naval boundaries within the naval range, and of course we had a squadron which actually look the air cover which we talked about for navy, which navy Pakistan navy always wanted a separate squadron from Pakistan Air Force to be part of Navy aviation, which would actually give cover to its fleet. But that is something which still they are looking into. But right now the cover has been given by Karachi Air Force, a base in Karachi Air Force. Let's not name it. And we had GF-17 Thunder, which had the dual capability of doing that. But of course, Pakistan Navy should, I personally believe, should get a separate squadron to give its air cover. But GF-17 at this time is sufficient enough, right? So okay, this has been okay. Been complain of voice being low. At this okay. So Pakistan. So this is one aspect of how Pakistan Navy had done, but it's a modern force, or it's in how do we put it? It's still in evolution. Obviously, this is something which Pakistan, I think, changed its policy from Navy being an attacking force to a defensive offensive force, where there's a lot of modernization is going on with the air cover given by GF-17 Thunder. Although there's a lot of order being processed, I think in 28, 29, Pakistan Navy would be in a better position. But at the same time, and then of course there's been questions as to why Pakistan never won, or never questions where as to why we don't want to buy um, um, an aircraft carrier, because we don't want to, of course. um, and how do we cope up with the India, because we are not an expansionist country, of course. India have three, and how we've seen what has happened with Vikrant, with our Odeon actually today for the first time went into in forward deployment. And if there was Vikrant, of course, there, and this is still to be confirmed. But the story right now is the PC Odeon from Pakistan jammed the GSM signal for Vikrant, and IBS Vikrant had to retreat to its original deployment position from an aggressive posture, where it would attack or block the Karachi port to a max. So my analysis is the Navy, Pakistan Navy, is well equipped. And the idea is that we would have, and then of course there are the missiles which we have from surface to water, and some of the procurements which we done very recently, which actually threatens the Indian carriers. The strategy is B1, B A1, B2 strategy, which we'll discuss in some other times, but they're very well equipped. So just wanted to bring an attention to, and then there is talk about Indian naval blockade. Just before that, I'll tell you what has happened very recently is that the Pakistani, so a PF base which actually gives air cover to Pakistan Navy, very recently Pakistan intelligence agencies have caught a terrorist cell which was working very close to or wanted to attack that same naval base which actually gives out cover to Pakistan Navy, which was a very strategic. So all these TTP cell was busted, and apparently it was busted when this has happened. It shows our intelligence capabilities. There've been a sweeping operations in both counterintelligence and intelligence, and there's a lot of signals from open set intelligence and from tactical intelligence which comes into signals. But of course, for that TTP ring to be caught just close to a base in Karachi which was actually giving naval cover actually pointed to a fact that somehow that some people from the TTP or some section of the TTP had been bought by Indian intelligence agencies to do the dirty work in urban areas in Pakistan. Then comes obviously today eight. There've been reports of eight Turkish aircraft which has landed in Pakistan. They brought in some good infrastructure. We talked about drone warfare. So Pakistan had an indigenous drone program. We produced Sharper and Sharper 2 and we talked about Sharper 3, and then we inducted some Chinese ones, but the Turkish has been very effective in and friend, they are our brothers. Of course, they'll be giving us some great new drone technology which is used and abused in the Ukrainian and Russian conflict, and anti-drones weapons as well. So that would strengthen our drone capability. India doesn't come close to our strategy. So overall strategy, and I'll talk about naval blockade. So let's suppose there've been war gaming on if India comes and somehow blocks or do a naval blockade of Pakistan. Pakistan has this some plan to counter it, of course. But let's suppose, what if the Pakistan Navy blocks Indian routes? Most of the Western India actually exports most of its commodities to West, and the route goes through to a place or to Arabian Sea. So Pakistan Navy has this capability of actually blocking it. Even I was reading from war games and everything. What we learned is that a single day of blockade would cost India up to about $3 to $4 billion, and the world oil would, if Pakistan somehow blocks Indian merchant ships, would shoot up to $140. So that is the nuisance of naval blockade. So that is something, but it's very far fetched. I wouldn't think this would go on to this, but obviously war gaming goes on and around in any country. And of course, I'd like to conclude with the fact that there will not be a hot war as a lot of people has been escalating. I think there would be some sort of a response out of anger from India, um, driven by politics, not by strategy. And this is where Pakistanis have to understand, or the Pakistani establishment need to understand, and as to how to respond to. If India does what's supposed to do, so but the PF is in air, the Navy is in the sea, and the army looks after. And it is us, the Pakistanis, and our responsibility to be their ears, eyes, and their help in this regard. But I personally believe that India would attack. This is a silence before the war. There would be some sort of a limited skirmish in and around LOC, Gilgit Baltistan, to as far fetch and Siachen. Pakistan is ready for this, and let's see how things would transpire. But the situation is tense, and I believe that the economies of both India and Pakistan would be hurt in that aspect. As to Pakistan's nuclear strike capability, if anybody in India thinks Pakistan would not use a tactical nuclear weapon, I heard the chatter from somewhere that other honge. That will be foolish enough to be. That is the clutter from the Pakistani side, and the it's just not nuclear posturing. This time, I think Pakistan under the new chief has shown more aggressiveness than any other. I think this is bigger than the Indian Parliament attack escalation, or even 2611 escalation. Finally, I'll put in a point that the Saudis and Middle Eastern partners had been active in bringing Pakistan and in India together. I think the right way forward is these hot-headed people has to sit down somewhere through somebody, and a solution needs to be found somehow onto this, or there would be a war which would be, I think India would face more destruction than Pakistan. Thank you.